My name is Lena Ashford. I served as a major in the United States Army for 9 years, 3 deployments, 2 commendations, and 1 Purple Heart. And today, I sat in court as my own family tried to erase every trace of that life. They said I stole the identity of a dead veteran. They told the judge I was mentally unstable. They called me a fraud, a liar, a parasite. I said nothing. My brother Brandon pointed across the room at me like I was a criminal. His voice cracked with performative outrage as he held up what he called evidence. My parents sat behind him, mother dabbing fake tears father with his arms crossed cold and clean in his favorite courtroom blazer. The judge turned to me. "Miss Ashford," he said, "do you have any response to these allegations?" I looked at him steady. I didn't reach for a folder or raise my voice. I simply adjusted the silver watch on my left wrist, the one that had been given to me by my commanding officer the day I retired. Then I met the judge's eyes. "No, Your Honor," I said, "I don't." A beat passed. "Someone else will speak for me." And just then the double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Boots echoed on the polished floor. A tall man in full uniform stepped forward, his medals shining under the harsh fluorescent lights. And I finally let myself exhale, because I knew exactly who he was. And so did they. I didn't come from a military family. My father was a regional bank manager, obsessed with order and appearance. My mother floated between yoga studios and garden clubs, and my brother Brandon, he was the golden one. Captain of the lacrosse team business school darling, the one who made everyone proud without ever really trying. Me, I was the quiet one. I liked puzzles and radio signals. I joined the Army at 19 not because I wanted medals, but because I needed a language for discipline that wasn't punishment. The military gave me that. Structure, purpose, silence without shame. I rose fast, not because I knew how to play the game, but because I didn't. I followed orders, stayed late, volunteered when no one else did. And when my unit was deployed to Helmand Province, I became one of the first women to lead a joint recon op in the area. I didn't tell my family much. Part of me wanted to keep that world sacred. Part of me didn't want to explain why I'd chosen something so far from what they expected. They sent Christmas cards and news clippings about Brandon's promotions, but they never asked what I did overseas. Not even once. When I came home after my final tour, tired, limping, and changed, they didn't meet me at the airport. I remember sitting on the curb with my duffel, watching other soldiers run into the arms of their parents. I told myself it was okay. They weren't good with feelings. They probably didn't know the flight time, but deep down, I knew. They didn't come because they didn't understand who I had become, because they never really wanted to. I moved to Texas a few months later and used my retirement stipend to start something that mattered. Ashford Haven, a small community center for female veterans struggling to reintegrate. It wasn't fancy, just 6 cabins and a converted barn we used for trauma recovery programs, group PT, and night watch groups. Word spread. A senator toured the place. The local paper did a spread on our work. We got a grant from the Veteran Women's Leadership Initiative. That was when the phone calls started. Brandon wanted to discuss the family name being attached to politics. My mother sent emails laced with concern. "Do you really think this image is good for you, honey?" My father called me a few times, asking why I'd never mentioned any real injuries when I visited home. I never answered any of them, but I knew what it really was: control. They couldn't stand that I had built something they didn't understand, didn't fund, and couldn't manipulate. Then came the subpoena. Brandon filed it personally, claiming I had forged my service history and was collecting funds meant for real veterans. In the filing, he included screenshots of my old private Instagram, a blurry photo of me at a barbecue with no uniform, and a note saying I had never been deployed to a combat zone. He knew. Of course he knew. But Brandon had one gift above all else. He could make a lie sound like concern. That's when I realized something deeper than betrayal was at play. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. He wanted the world to forget who I had been. And worst of all, he thought he could get away with it. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not just the air, but the way people looked at me, curious, unsure, some even skeptical. The woman checking IDs at security gave my license a second glance before waving me through. One of Brandon's lawyers spotted me in the hallway and smiled like he was about to sell me something. I said nothing. I had chosen not to wear my dress uniform, not out of shame, out of defiance. I wanted them to see me as I was plain, navy suit, flat shoes, no ribbons, no declarations. Because if they couldn't recognize a soldier without the armor, then they didn't deserve the truth. Inside the courtroom, Brandon sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by two attorneys in sleek charcoal suits. My parents sat right behind him. My mother wore her favorite pearl earrings. My father looked bored, as if this were a routine meeting, not a public crucifixion of his daughter. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I kept my eyes forward. The bailiff called the case. Brandon's lead attorney stood first. He began with what he called a matter of public trust. Your Honor, he said, this is a difficult case. Our client did not want to bring it forward, but the defendant, Ms. Lena Ashford, has presented herself as a veteran of the United States Army. She has accepted public funding, media attention, and nonprofit grants under this claim. We will show today that this representation is false. He then held up an enlarged image, me maybe 22, wearing jeans and a hoodie at some backyard party. This, Your Honor, is the defendant at the time she claims to have been in Afghanistan. No uniform, no deployment orders, no record of injury, no DD 214 on file. I didn't flinch. They continued like that for 20 more minutes, laying out doctored timelines, questioning inconsistencies, casting doubt on paperwork that had been redacted for security reasons. They even brought up the fact that I used a P.O. box for all Ashford Haven correspondence, as if privacy was proof of deceit. When they finished, Brandon rose. I didn't want to believe it, he said, voice steady. But the more I looked into it, the more things didn't add up. I couldn't let her keep lying. Not about something this serious. Not when real soldiers die every day. He turned and looked right at me. I knew my sister. And this isn't her. There was a murmur in the room. The judge banged the gavel for quiet. I remained still. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "You sure you don't want to take the stand?" I nodded once. "Let them talk." He sighed, leaned back. The judge turned to our side. "Defense?" My lawyer stood. "We have submitted sealed documents to Chambers, Your Honor, including active service records and sworn statements. Due to the nature of my client's prior assignments, full disclosure is restricted by federal classification protocols." He paused, then added, "However, we are calling one final witness to address the matter publicly." Brandon's attorney scoffed, a surprise witness. The judge didn't object. Then I heard it. The side door opened with a hiss. Heavy boots on the courtroom floor, measured steps, controlled weight, and then a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. "Permission to approach, Your Honor." My heart stopped. There he was, Lieutenant General Raymond Keller, my former commanding officer. 3 stars on his chest, dozens of campaigns under his belt, the man who once told me I was the calm in 1,000 storms. The courtroom turned silent. My mother froze. Brandon's jaw moved, but no sound came out. General Keller approached the bench, handed a thick envelope to the bailiff, and turned to the room. "My name is Raymond Keller. I served with Major Lena Ashford. I commanded her unit from 2012 to 2015, and I stand here today to say every accusation made against her is false." He let that hang in the air. Then slowly he raised his hand to his brow and saluted me. I didn't move, didn't cry, just nodded once because some truths are too deep for words. General Keller stood at the center of the courtroom like he belonged there, not as a prop, not as a token military face, but as a man with weight in his words and decades behind his posture. When he saluted me, it wasn't ceremonial. It was recognition. He turned to the judge, and his voice dropped low, measured, steady, undeniable. "I oversaw Major Ashford's operations in Kandahar, Herat, and Helmand Province. She led over a dozen high-risk reconnaissance missions and saved the lives of 4 soldiers during a blackout incident in late 2013. I was there. I saw it." The judge nodded for him to continue. General Keller opened the envelope he had handed to the bailiff. Inside were original orders bearing Department of Defense seals, tactical deployment rosters, commendation certificates, and most damning to the prosecution, a dated photograph. It showed me in full fatigues standing in front of a downed vehicle in the middle of an arid field, a bloodied bandage on my left arm, 2 soldiers flanking me. Brandon's lawyer squirmed. General Keller pointed to the image. That was taken 3 hours after we lost radio contact. Major Ashford stayed behind to retrieve classified intel under active fire. She could have left with the others. She didn't. She stayed, and she brought all of them back. He turned to the courtroom. If this is the person you're accusing of fabrication, then maybe you ought to rethink who's really lying. A silence spread like wildfire. Then Brandon leapt to his feet. Anyone can forge documents. I don't care what kind of metals she faked. She's been lying to us for years, cutting us off, building some self-righteous war shelter just to feel superior. The judge held up a hand, but Brandon kept going. She's always had this savior complex. She needs people to think she's special. That's why she made all this up, because she can't stand that nobody cares. My lawyer rose. Your Honor. But the judge didn't need prompting. His voice sliced clean through the tension. Mr. Ashford, sit down. Brandon hesitated, trembling. Now. He dropped back into his seat. The judge looked to General Keller. Sir, I appreciate your testimony. It is clear, thorough, and compelling. Then he looked at me. Miss Ashford, do you wish to respond? I stood slowly, not out of nerves, but to give my voice room. I didn't come here today to prove anything to my family. I came here because I was accused publicly, legally, and I had to answer. But I will say this. I turned to Brandon. You knew. You always knew. You read the letters. You saw the discharge forms. You just didn't like that I built something without your help. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. And as for our parents, I added, shifting my gaze, you had every chance to ask me who I was. You chose not to. That's not confusion. That's willful ignorance. My mother's eyes glistened, but I didn't stop. You didn't lose a daughter. You just never looked close enough to see the one you had. I sat down. The bench beneath me felt like stone, but my spine held firm. General Keller nodded once, then stepped back. As he passed my chair, he murmured just loud enough for me to hear. You never needed me to speak for you, Ashford. But it was time they heard it from someone they couldn't ignore. And then he walked out, every step punctuated by the weight of truth. Behind me, Brandon collapsed into his hands. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift in the room. Not pity, not admiration, respect. The judge called for a recess, but no one moved. The courtroom held its breath. Brandon sat stiffly, fingers laced together so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His face, usually so composed, so curated, had collapsed into something raw. He wasn't angry now. He looked cornered. My parents remained behind him, frozen in place. My mother still clutched her clutch bag with both hands, the knuckles of her ringed fingers trembling. My father stared straight ahead, as if by refusing to look at me, he could rewind the day back into something more manageable, something deniable. I didn't move. I watched. Because for once I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to prove anything. They were unraveling themselves. The judge returned after 10 minutes, his robe shifting slightly as he sat. I've reviewed the documentation provided by General Keller. He began, voice cool, measured. And I've conferred with the Department of Defense Verification Office. There is no question in the court's mind that Miss Ashford did in fact serve with distinction in multiple active duty roles during her tenure in the U.S. Army. He paused, eyes landing on Brandon. What I do question is the motive behind this lawsuit and the extent to which this court's time has been wasted in pursuit of something that amounts to little more than personal spite. Brandon opened his mouth, but the judge raised one hand sharply. No, you don't get to spin it now. The judge turned to me. Miss Ashford, the court dismisses this case with prejudice. Furthermore, I will be referring the matter to the district attorney's office for potential charges of defamation and civil harassment, should you wish to pursue them. I nodded once. I won't. I just want it to end. He studied me for a beat longer, then gave a subtle nod of respect. "You're free to go." My lawyer reached for my papers. I stood, slowly turned to leave, then stopped. Brandon was still sitting there, looking at the floor. My mother had begun to whisper something to him, but it wasn't soothing. It was frantic, almost desperate. Like she couldn't believe they hadn't been believed, that the script hadn't played out in their favor. I stepped closer, just far enough for them to hear me. "You didn't fail to protect the family name," I said quietly. "You just failed to realize it was never yours to protect in the first place." My father looked up at that. Not in rage, but confusion. "I carried this family's name into places you couldn't even imagine. I wore it when it weighed more than body armor. You had a chance to honor that. Instead, you tried to bury it." Brandon's eyes flicked toward me, rimmed red. "You shut us out, Lena." "No," I replied, voice like glass. "You shut the door. I just stopped knocking." And then I left. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and uncaring. I blinked against it, the light foreign after hours under courthouse fluorescence. A few reporters waited at the bottom of the stairs, microphones poised like weapons. I raised a hand not to wave, but to halt them. No comment, because this wasn't about press. It wasn't about image or vengeance, or even justice anymore. It was about reclaiming something simple, the truth of who I was without apology. I reached the curb. A dark sedan waited across the street, one of the volunteers from Ashford Haven behind the wheel. As I crossed, I saw a reflection in the window. Me standing tall, face bare. No uniform, no shield. Just me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I didn't go back to the center right away. After the verdict, after the gavel fell, and the courtroom emptied like the aftermath of a storm, I got in my truck and just drove. No GPS, no destination. I followed the longest road west into the hill country, where the air smelled like cedar and the sky was finally, blessedly silent. 3 days. I spent 3 days alone in a rental cabin with cracked wood floors, mismatched chairs, and a tiny stone fireplace. I left my phone powered off in the glove compartment. I didn't want congratulations. I didn't want apologies. I wanted stillness. And maybe, if the silence lasted long enough, understanding. Each morning, I sat on the back porch with a black enamel mug full of instant coffee and watched the fog lift from the treetops. No medals, no cameras, no headlines. Just the sound of birdsong and the creak of wood that hadn't been varnished in years. The world didn't care that I'd been vindicated. And strangely, that comforted me. On the third evening, I opened the small box I kept in the side pocket of my bag. Inside was a frayed compass pendant, its needle long broken, the face scratched from years of wear. It had been a gift from Lieutenant Harper, the first woman I'd ever served under. She gave it to me in Helmand after a failed mission when I'd blamed myself for a young corporal's injury. "You don't have to always know where you're going," she'd told me. "You just have to keep moving toward who you are." I held the pendant in my palm for a long time that night. Then I tucked it into my jacket and turned back toward home. When I reached Ashford Haven, the gates opened like they had missed me. The gravel crunched under the tires, and from the main building, I saw the porch lights blink on. Someone had seen me coming. Tara was the first to appear barefoot, carrying 2 mugs, like a soldier returning from patrol. "You look like hell," she said, grinning. I grinned back. Good. Means I'm home. Inside, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. On my desk was a pile of handwritten notes pinned neatly under a weight stone shaped like a star. Some said thank you. Others simply signed their names, a kind of silent salute. One stood out in particular. It was from Alicia, the Air Force tech sergeant, who couldn't look anyone in the eye when she first arrived. Her note was only one line. "You showed me that being silent didn't mean being weak." That one stayed with me. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name in plain block letters. Inside was a photo, me and Brandon, maybe 6 and 8 years old, building a fort out of pillows in our childhood living room. We were laughing. On the back, he'd written, "I don't expect anything, but I remember this. And I hope you do too." I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I placed it in a drawer next to my discharge papers and that one yellowed page of an oplog from Kandahar, the one where my name was spelled wrong but my actions recorded right. That felt symbolic enough. Some memories don't need to be rewritten, just acknowledged. The award ceremony came and went. The mayor spoke too long. The press wanted sound bites. I gave none. The real moment for me came when Jasmine, one of our first program graduates, stood up beside me and with a voice clear as glass, said Lena Ashford didn't come back from war to be celebrated. She came back to build something, and she let the rest of us stand on that foundation. That was the first time I felt my chest crack open again, not with pain, but with breath. That night, I returned to the greenhouse alone. I walked the rows of native herbs and slow-growing fruit trees. I ran my hand along the soil we'd amended by hand, each inch planted by someone who once thought they'd never grow again. I sat on the bench in the far corner, the one shaded by 2 cypress trees, and watched the stars rise. No audience, no need for armor. And I thought maybe healing isn't loud. Maybe it's just a quiet, steady place you return to over and over again until you stop flinching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying my name like a burden. I was carrying it like a banner.